Don't eat that.
It isn't easy dating Throoth, and she'd be the first to admit it. It's a lot to handle, having a girlfriend with such a unique perspective on the world.
You need to be aware of your metabolism,
She says while sinking her teeth into what must have been her third mutton leg within the span of an hour.
You're half mortal after all.
She speaks with certainty, because she can afford to. It makes some things easier, but other things harder. Whenever she turns her crimson gaze on Jesus, he's got no choice but to tense up, pray for the best, and hope that she sees good fortune in his future. Otherwise, she might break up with him. He doesn't know when staying together with her became so important to him. What Jesus does remember is how they met, and how he hadn't ever considered their coupling a possibility. It was back when godlings from all the pantheons would be called to Eden. An archangel, Jesus can't remember which one, suggested that they should attend courses taught by the elder gods before settling into a dominion the world no longer needed. It made sense to go with Eden because it's common ground, and even if it didn't, there wasn't any deity bold enough to challenge Jesus' parent, the King of Kings. Jesus showed up early to class every day with a bounce in his step, a smile on his face, and a scroll tucked under his arm. Jesus always made sure to sit in the front row, partly so he could be closest to the teacher, but mainly to be furthest away from the godlings that tended to give him the most trouble. The Olympians, Kami, and Egyptian were fine, as were the Erysians, and even the occasional Babylonian would greet him in the hall. But no matter how hard Jesus tried, he couldn't befriend any of the Aesir or She. They'd bombard him with spitballs laced with magic that would shock, or silence him when he'd go to answer a question.
Why do you even bother?
Susanoo asked while picking at the rice at the bottom of his bento. He made a sour face upon seeing he'd eaten all the fish.
What do you mean?
Jesus asked as he cupped his own fish dish. Seconds later, he moved his hand, revealing that he'd multiplied the fish. He put a healthy portion in Susanoo's bento and went to offer some to Horace, who was too busy stuffing his beak to even pay their conversation any mind.
You've got your place in the world carved out. Mortals either worship you, your dad, or swear off the gods entirely. Doesn't your dad give you a cut of the orison? Who needs to learn how to be the god of something when he's already considered god of everything?
Oh, I guess.
Jesus looked down at his fish and didn't feel so hungry anymore. It was true, he was just attending the classes because he wanted to make friends and learn about the other pantheons. Unlike his peers, this world was made for Jesus. He didn't actually have to study to secure a job in a world that didn't believe in him. As far as the majority of mortals are concerned, his religion is the only religion. Jesus liked hanging out with Susanoo and Horace because they were like him, sons of the top gods of their respective pantheons. But he supposed now that their fathers had to answer to his, they weren't really at the top anymore, were they? Susanoo and Horace were cool about it, or at the very least, they never bothered to let him know how much they hated it, not like Throoth, who glared daggers at Jesus each day from across the lunchroom. He'd look over and wave, and she'd just glare even harder, so hard that it would storm outside the lunchroom. She hated that her father, Thor, was no longer the sole protector of Midgard, and that he had to struggle to make ends meet as an Archangel cadet. Things persisted that way for a century. Jesus came to school, dealt with bullies, and endured the unending glares of the Aesir princess. If someone were to ask him out of the blue, he'd deny Throoth was pretty or even the least bit cute, but that's because he was blinded by her nasty attitude. But Jesus couldn't argue with the attention she got. Next to Athena and a few of the older girls, Throoth was the most popular. When she wasn't tailing Athena, she was alone, and when she was alone, someone was always trying to make nice with her. After turning down hundreds of boys, and in some cases girls, Throoth approached Jesus. The most intimidating girl in school, the girl he avoided like the plague because of her reputation. Any guy who so much as looked in Throoth's direction ran the chance of being burned to a crisp by a random bolt of lightning. Of course, Jesus knew the lightning wasn't random. It had to be coming from Throoth's father, who'd made a name for himself as being the most overprotective father in the cosmos. The complete opposite of Jesus' parent, who left him out to dry on a cross back in 33 AD. All the bullying led to Jesus needing 2 angelic bodyguards at all times, a fact that left him red as a sheep's hair. The petite Valkyrie in training wasn't the least bit fazed by Jesus' bodyguards. Throoth walked up and grabbed him by the collar and dragged him into the hall where she slammed him up against a locker. All she had to say for herself was,
Diplomatic immunity.
It seemed like she didn't know what that really meant, and judging by Jesus' bodyguards' lack of action, they didn't either. Belying her size, Throoth hoisted Jesus up with one arm in a display of strength owed to her Aesir and Jotun heritage. She brushed one of her long braids over her shoulders, blew on the long bang raking her forehead, and scowled up at Jesus. He hadn't thought of her as cute, only as a short, angry girl who wore wolf's pelts and boots too large for her feet. But right then, he felt some heat in his cheeks. Was it the fairness of her skin compared to his? Or the otherworldly nature of her red eyes? No, it had to be the fact that she didn't care who he was. She wasn't intimidated by him or his angels. She didn't whisper about him behind his back or throw things from the back of the class. Throoth approached him like they were equals. No, like she was superior. She had guts. And right then, Jesus learned he really liked guts.
I hate you.
He already knew that, but it still stung.
I hate you, and I'm gonna make sure I sit on the throne instead of you. Your angelic age is over. Under my rule, the Aesir will return to glory. Understand?
What?
Understand?
A spark of lightning trickled across her longest, most prominent bang.
Yup. I get it. You'll be the king of kings someday.
That's right.
Throoth dropped him, and he hit the ground hard.
And I'll be a better king than you ever could. I'll make Midgard so happy that it'll shine bright as heaven. They'll pray to me and Papa, and things will be great again, like they were before you came along.
Jesus noticed she balled her hand into a fist, but he wasn't afraid she'd hit him. On the contrary, he was afraid of how much he'd hurt her.
Yup, got it.
Jesus stammered with a nervous chuckle. As she turned to leave, he spoke up.
May I ask where this came from? I'm used to you hating me from a distance. Did I do something to encourage a more direct approach?
No.
Throoth crossed her arm and tilted her hips, as though trying to look more grown up.
Grandpa said that if there was anything I really needed to say to anyone, it should be today. He's always right about these things. Now leave me alone. I've got some weaklings to turn down.
Throoth left, and the rest of the day went like any other would. The day after was another story altogether. The next day, Odin, Throoth's grandfather, was devoured by a Jotun direwolf named Fenrir, a beast he'd locked away in the hopes of deterring the apocalyptic visions he'd foreseen. Jesus wasn't sure how the wolf escaped, nor was there time to dwell on it in the chaos that ensued. Mortals began to renounce their religions en masse, and the gods were hit with an unprecedented drought of divinity. There was a prison break in hell, and demons invaded Midgard. The Jotuns rebelled against the Aesir in a conflict that quickly spiraled into an all-out war between the two pantheons. Violence spread through the realms like wildfire, and in the span of a few days, several of the ruling deities across every pantheon were snuffed out or seemed to disappear altogether. Eventually, even Jesus' parent vanished. The cosmos was shaken by an event Jesus' people called the Apocalypse, and Throoth's people called Ragnarok. Midgard erupted into chaos the likes of which the realm had never seen, and it wasn't long before the planet fell to ruin. Humanity's subsequent extinction marked the dawn of a new age, the last age of the gods. In what felt like a span of minutes to a god like himself, Jesus went from being the top deity to being just like everyone else. Sure, he still had a lot of divinity left over after the war, more than most, but the fighting had taken its toll on him. Even so, he rolled up his scrolls, packed up his satchel, and smiled eagerly at the long Midgardian road ahead of him. So long as his heart continued to beat, he'd keep searching for a way to save the gods. Whether that came in the form of a new source of divinity or a way to resurrect the mortals, Jesus didn't care so long as it saved everyone. Right, but that's all off topic. Yeah, it seems really important, and definitely is, but this was supposed to be about Jesus' relationship with Throoth. Suffice to say, he was happy to find her among the survivors on Midgard. She was holed up in an old, abandoned apartment. Throoth had lost color in her face, and was malnourished on account of not having divinity for who knows how long. But it didn't matter how thin her limbs were, or how dry her lips had become. She was still brimming with the same strong aura. She still had guts. Still had the same hard glare he remembered from school that burned his skin. Oh, wait, no, that was just the lightning because she electrocuted him on sight. Letting Jesus in was the polite thing to do. So he hadn't expected Throoth to do such an un-Acer-like thing. She not only welcomed him in, she took him to a room and assured him he could stay, rent-free. Jesus doubted anyone else would pay to live in a place with so many holes in the wall, but he wouldn't say that to a girl who could sink continents with a punch.
You're...
She started, stammering, and Jesus wanted to comfort her.
Don't even think about it.
She said as though she read his thoughts. Then her face flushed, and with a pout and a huff, she looked away, brows furrowed. Jesus never thought he'd see it in a million years, but in that moment, she looked vulnerable, even more so than when she was lacking in divinity earlier.
You're going to become my boyfriend from now on. We're dating.
Date. Jesus. Jesus and Throoth date. Dating. As in a couple. Why? It wasn't until the third or fourth date when she gave Jesus another pointed look and explained.
The odds are in my favor. Waiting until the third date for a kiss worked. You'll make me your bride.
Wasn't she rushing things?
I can see the future.
She said, motioning to her eyes as though that explained everything.
Our coupling will unify our pantheons, and together, we'll reverse a great deal of the damage Ragnarok caused to the cosmos.
Throoth tilted her head and let her mouth hang open.
Though, of course, you can try to change your fate by breaking up with me now. But then, of course, I wouldn't be able to prevent that from happening to you.
Jesus never learned of the that Throoth spoke of, but it was certainly a great way to keep him leashed to the concept of their happily ever after. A year later, Throoth approached Jesus with her hair down and her gaze fixed on the ground. They'd just found a group of surviving gods and ushered them back to the apartment building where Jesus had found Throoth. It was her idea for him to erect a domain there and to share whatever divinity he had to get the survivors healed and back on their feet. She looked so beautiful.
This is the part where you compliment me.
She cast an expectant glance on Jesus.
Come on, don't keep me waiting. I already saw it, so go on.
Jesus didn't answer because Throoth was so much cuter when flustered. The small girl tried to act cold, but so often her fair skin betrayed her as the red in her cheeks was just so obvious.
I'm warning you. Say it. Or else.
She said, shaking her fist. Throoth sighed, and Jesus assumed he'd messed up, and even if he hadn't, she would see when he would, making all the stress utterly pointless. He still felt stressed anyway.
Do you love me?
Throoth asked, not looking at him and making his heart skip.
It's been this long, and in my visions, well, by now you'd have confessed. So why haven't you?
Throoth looked at Jesus, and he feared he'd melt before her.
You don't love me, do you?
Jesus didn't know what to say. Didn't she already know what he could say? So what's the best answer when she'd see them all coming?
Because if you don't...
No threats. No bad ends. No terrible tomorrows. Jesus didn't give her the chance to go on one of her possibility tangents. He ended it right there by gripping both her hands tight as he could, yanking her forward and knocking his forehead on hers. He hoped it'd be a romantic gesture, but it just left his head throbbing.
Marry me, Throoth.
Jesus said, his lungs on fire.
Be my wife. Be my queen. Please.
Even though they had lived longer lifetimes than any single mortal, they were still children by the standards of a god. But even so, Jesus felt as though they were all the cosmos had left. They'd shouldered so much in the past, but this time, they had each other. This time, neither of them had to bear this cross alone. Sure, maybe it was foolish to think that the two of them could bring peace back to the cosmos. They weren't their parents, and maybe that stacked the odds against them even more. Even so, Jesus had a feeling deep down inside that everything would work out. Or maybe that was just the side effect of having a girlfriend who could see the future?
Yeah,
Throoth said, smiling brighter than any time before.
I guess I wouldn't mind marrying you too much.
Jesus tried lifting her, but he wasn't strong enough, so she lifted him instead. They spun, they kissed, and they laughed for the rest of the night. Jesus looked to the sky, felt the chill of the air linger along his skin, and smiled as he gazed up at the starlight that spread out like a blanket to shelter this wreck of a world.
You know, despite everything, I'm glad.
He murmured, pulling her in close to his side.
I'm glad that right here and now, Out of all the paths you've seen, we are here walking this one together.
Would there be problems? Of course, but Throoth could see them all coming, so Jesus was confident that no matter what, they would be together forever. Leaning down, he placed a kiss atop her head. She looked up at him and smiled. He smiled back.
You're going to make a great queen.